Also, one more thing, Akanksha and Priyanka, my internet connection is like very not very stable. So, do you guys have better connection?
Yes, ma'am, we have a good connection.
Also, one more thing,
Yes,
Akanksha.
ma'am, same.
Okay, thank you. Right, it's 6-1. I think we should start. First of all, thank you, Nehal ma'am, for being here, for doing this. I would like to open the stage for our moderators to take this forward.
A very warm welcome to everyone joining us today for the March edition of KARM Talk. Nehal ma'am, we are so delighted to have you here. And for the audience, our previous speaker, Miss Nandani, couldn't join because of some health issues. So the speaker for the day is Nehal Sharma ma'am from Pravah. And once again, thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out time and doing this talk with us. So, before diving into today's session, let's have a brief intro of what Karma and Karma Avaz is. So, Priyanka, can we move to the next slide? Yeah. Karma is an academic fellowship empowering young Indian women from underprivileged background uh, to achieve financial independence, confidence, and lasting careers through workshops, mentorship, and other engagements. Whereas Karm Avaz is a fellow led initiative amplifying real stories of resilience, inspiring sisterhood, social emotional growth, and professional success. Uh, Next, we have like few guidelines for the session. Okay, so participants like who are joining us from YouTube live, please put your questions and queries in the live chat and we will pick up from there towards the end of the session. In case the YouTube live session faces any technical issues, a Zoom link will be shared with the community and it will be open on first come first basis. So limited, it is very limited to 100 participants. The recording and relevant session material will later be uploaded on the linking channel for wider access. And all questions that you guys put on the live chat would be compiled and addressed by the facilitator towards the end of the session. Now over to Priyanka to move this ahead.
Namaste, ma'am. First of all, I'm really glad to welcome you today to have your presence here. I'll begin by introducing Nehal Sharma is a senior youth development practitioner with leading youth center programs in Delhi and Rajasthan with Pravah. A graduate in political science from the University of Delhi, she currently leads initiatives focused on gender, youth leadership, and community engagement, working closely with diverse groups of young people across urban and rural contexts. Her work spans program leadership in areas as gender equity, youth leadership, development, and COVID 19 response, alongside facilitating both national and international, virtual and in person exchange programs. Nehal has also collaborated extensively with trainers and educators to build capacities and strengthen youth led processes. She has been actively engaged in social impact space since her university years, contributing as a volunteer to multiple organizations and initiatives. She is deeply committed to creating spaces where young people can lead change with confidence and purpose. I welcome you again, ma'am. We are really glad to have you here today and listen your thoughts. Since our
Thank you
topic
so much. Hi, everybody. Hello.
since our topic today is sexual health and well-being, um, we have a few questions we have gathered from the women around us, and we will be really glad to hear your thoughts on that and what you have to say. So, one of the questions is that what does meaningful access to sexual and reproductive health and rights look like for young people today in the current times?
I think meaningful access. Thank you so much, first of all, for organizing this and also having me. I think, obviously, because I'm a youth worker and I also work with young people on gender and SRHR, this is quite an interest area for me. So, thank you for having me. I think when we talk about meaningful access for young people to, SRHR services, etc., I think for me, I think the first thing is that there isn't really a one set standard, right? There isn't a one solution applicable to all because young people, when you think about it, and SRHR, when you think about it, is so complex and diverse. So I think the complexity and the kind of solutioning that would work or meaningful access would really be defined by who are we addressing as young people, whether it's what gender are we addressing, which background are we addressing, which culture are we addressing, where they are located geographically. Are we addressing there's such an intersectionality of people's identities that impact what really is access, right? Or how are they accessing? I think that's something. I think if I talk about within that, what are some things that I would say or we feel are really, is defines meaningful access would be that there is open conversations with young people about what really is SRHR, right? I think we are at a point where even that is something that's a far-fetched reality that's not happening very actively. There aren't conversations with young people where they what really does SRHR construed of, that knowledge is so limited. I think that's what it would mean. I think it would also mean like knowing what are the services that fall under SRHR and how is it that you access them, right? So whether it's access to clinics, whether it's doctors, whether it's information, whether it's any kind of product and service. I think that I think also when it comes to conversations meaningful, when we talk about meaningful access, it would also mean that when conversations related to sexual health and well-being are being talked about, it's not being talked about just from an abstinence perspective, which is the case in a lot of places. That sex or sexual activity is something that you don't address. इसके बारे में ये नहीं करना है and things like that, because उससे क्या है, जब सेफ सेक्स की बात आ रही है, दैट्स जस्ट कॉन्स्टेंटली बीइंग डिस्करेज, राइट? बिकॉज एब्सटिनेंस की बात करके आप सेफ सेक्स पे तो बात कर ही नहीं रहे हैं. I think that, and I think also spaces that are non-judgmental, because there's so much, so much hush around SRHR. I think there's also a lot of judgment around it, and which is why like meaningful access is not possible in the absence of a judgment free space. Like a judgment free space is needed to be able to meaningfully access SRHR related products or services. I think for me, all of this combined would really constitute meaningful access for young people.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So you talked about how like there are stigmas around talking about this
Yeah,
particular topic.
yeah.
So what kind of conversation do we need to have more in our families, schools, and communities to normalize this topic so that we can
Mhm.
openly talk about it?
Yeah, yeah. I think quite honestly, and especially because बहुत सारा मेरा काम राजस्थान और दिल्ली में रहा है, and in both of these places, what I have learned is that क्वाइट ऑनेस्टली कॉन्वर्जेशंस कैसे होने चाहिए उससे पहले तो ये बैरियर है कि कॉन्वर्जेशंस हो, है ना। तो चाहे वो रूरल स्पेस हो, चाहे वो अर्बन स्पेस हो, चाहे वो दिल्ली का कॉलेज हो या गांव का कोई यंग पर्सन जो शायद कॉलेज में भी नहीं है, इट्स अ वेरी like the range of the experience and the questions and the lack of information would vary, but it is still lack of information, right? So there is no conversation. I think the first and foremost step would be ki conversation ho, right? I think the next one would be that the conversation is coming from sources that are also well equipped to have these conversations, because parents also, teachers also, even community leaders, even a lot of organizations are the people who are forefronting and having these conversations करेक्टली equipped नहीं है कि किस तरीके से बात हो रही है उस पे, है ना। सो आई थिंक दैट इज वेरी वेरी क्रूशियल। आई थिंक just also conversations that recognize that sexual health and sexual needs are basic needs, right? If we look at कि एक इंसान की क्या जरूरतें हैं, जो बेसिक नीड्स है, रोटी कपड़ा मकान के बियॉन्ड वाली, उसका एक बहुत खास हिस्सा है sexual needs, right? So to stop looking at it as taboo and really see it as a need that's very real for young people, right? So when you do that, right, when we create that kind of a space, agar wo conversation ho raha hoga, to then young people are also not being forced to go into random directions to get that information, because need hai, wo kahin ja nahi raha, information ठीक source से नहीं मिल रहा है तो कहीं से तो लेना है, then the option is to go ahead and interact with, let's say, the internet, which has such plethora of information that can it really be quite daunting, right? Or you're going to friends who are equally clueless. So I think that also, I think challenging shame, right? There's so much shame associated with SRHR, whether it's about sexual activity, whether it's about menstruation, whether it's about any kind of service you want to access under the realm of SRHR. All of that has so much shame around it. I think conversations that are devoid of shame. And I think the other one that I think of is very, very important is intergenerational conversations. So for us at Pravah, for example, intergenerational conversations have been a very, very crucial thing. So we at different instances try to encourage conversations between young people and parents, for example. So how is it that is this generations that sort of can come together, these two generations, and share those conversations and questions that they have, which probably the parents can answer from experience and the young people can also try and figure out through curiosity. I think that, and within this also specifically intergenerational conversations between women, क्योंकि even when we talk about SRHR, यंग लोगों में तो बातचीत नहीं हो रहा है, बट इवन मिडिल एज विमेन, कुछ भी, देयर सच लैक ऑफ अवेयरनेस प्री मेनोपॉज को लेके, मेनोपॉज को लेके, वो किस तरीके से रिस्पॉन्ड कर रहे हैं, क्या हो रहा है, वो अवेयरनेस ही नहीं है। तो आई थिंक विमेन themselves intergenerationally within generation can benefit so much from talking to each other. So I think that also, I think I would recommend as something that's very crucial when we talk about conversations, or what kind of conversations.
Uh, Thank you, ma'am. That brings me to another question. That is, we talked about how parents play a role into this, but I think there are also some of these conversations do not happen because there's systematic barriers to it. So,
Yeah.
how do you think can systems be made more youth friendly so that
Hmm.
young people feel safe and not
Yeah.
judged when they seek help? Like, what is the
Hmm.
role of parents, teachers, schools, and other stakeholders in these conversations?
Yeah. I think so many roles, right? Like I said, they are the first point of contact that a young person can possibly approach while they have questions, while they're trying to figure it out. So बहुत सारे रोल्स हैं आई थिंक, पेरेंट्स के, टीचर्स के, या फिर फैसिलिटेटर्स के, ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस के जो ये गैप फुलफिल करने की कोशिश कर रही हैं, या इनफैक्ट डॉक्टर्स के, right? I think so many roles that they have. I think specifically उसको यूथ फ्रेंडली कैसे बनाया जाए या यूथ रिस्पॉन्सिव कैसे बनाया जाए कि यंग इंसान एक्सेस कर सके अगर इतने challenges हैं. I think for me the first and foremost is to unlearn what you know, है ना? Because a lot of times हम खुद अपने lived reality से आ रहे होते हैं. Like my parents have come from their own system of thought and experience, right? And so have a lot of other people. And I think dealing with young people and navigating this journey with them means them understanding, like the folks on the other end, which is the teachers, educators, and parents, being open to being challenged on all they believe in. So, for example, if you as a parent have believed that, okay, no, this is the way to navigate menstrual health, for example, or this is the way to navigate sexual activity, for example. But if a young person comes to you and challenges that and says something completely counter opposite, being open to that, staying with that challenge. So, for example, एज अ यूथ वर्कर मेरे साथ हुआ है जब यंग लोगों ने आके एकदम बोला है कि नहीं नहीं, पर ये तो वो लड़की तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल या वो लड़का तो खराब है ना क्योंकि वो सेक्सुअल एक्टिविटी में एंगेज करता है, क्योंकि इतना टैबू है. तो एवरीथिंग इन मी वांट्स टू वेरी क्विकली बी लाइक कि नहीं नहीं तुम ऐसे नहीं बोल सकते, ये तो गलत बात है. बट taking a step back and holding on and being like, okay, it's coming from somewhere, it's coming from a history of having learned, that. So I think that challenging, I think, is very very crucial to ensure that you're creating a system that's youth friendly and youth responsive, right? I think the other very very crucial one that I think is especially important for medical practitioners is to practice non-judgment. I mean, who of us have not had a terrifying gynecologist, like an experience with a gynecologist, right? Every young woman that I have interacted with or I have spoken to has a horror story regarding a gynecologist or any kind of service that they wanted to access. So for them to be non-judgmental and not just look at young people as, ki, "Arey, oh, you are doing this, why are you doing this?" and meet it with a lot of questions, I think that would be important. I think the other one that I think is very, very crucial is that while designing systems, while designing concepts, while designing programs, whether in school, college, or in these spaces जहाँ पे संस्थाएं काम कर रही हैं, it's very, very crucial to ensure that young people have a voice in the design of it. So अगर आप एक प्रोग्राम बना रहे हैं या एक इनिशिएटिव बना रहे हैं, एक इंटरवेंशन बना रहे हैं जो यंग लोगों के SRHR की प्रॉब्लम्स को एड्रेस करता है, and if in the designing process you have not included a youth voice, then I think you've done a disservice. It cannot be that just people beyond the age group of young people, let's say if we're considering young people up until the age of 29 or 35, है ना, but अगर सब लोग 40 साल 45 साल 50 साल के हैं जो पूरा वो response या program बना रहे हैं, then it's not responding to youth needs because it doesn't have a youth voice. So ensuring that that's the case. For example, for us at Pravah, we have a youth advisory board, right? Which is a board that we go back to take advice from programs that we're designing, designs that we're making, forms that we're creating, to really ensure that young people are part of the designing process and not just the beneficiaries of everything that we are deciding to implement. So I think that's also another way that you ensure that the systems are youth friendly. क्योंकि अगर एक युवा आपके कमरे में उस कुर्सी पे बैठा होगा जहाँ पे आप निर्णय ले रहे हैं, चीजें डिजाइन कर रहे हैं, तो वो अपने आप उनका पर्सपेक्टिव दे रहे हैं. तो इट्स नॉट पॉसिबल टू मेक समथिंग दैट्स नॉट यूथ फ्रेंडली. वो ऑटोमेटिकली यूथ फ्रेंडली बनेगा. क्या?
I'm really glad to hear that, to hear about your experience as well around those conversations. Um, my next question is that we talked about like sexual reproductive health, but like how do you think that sexual and reproductive health is linked to education and career opportunities and financial independence?
I think very actively linked, है ना? And in so many ways, right? I think, for example, SRHR for a young girl, right, would be linked to things like education, like financial independence or career quite directly in the sense of कि अगर अच्छे से menstruation के बारे में नहीं पता है, menstrual health के बारे में नहीं पता है और उसकी इन एक्सेस और इन इल इंफॉर्मेशन की वजह से एक लड़की बहुत मामूली बात है कि पीछे रह जाती है ना। फॉर एग्जाम्पल गांव में, फॉर एग्जाम्पल स्मॉलर एरियाज में जहाँ पे शायद इतना एक्टिव एक्सेस नहीं है, तो वहां पे सीधे हेल्थ पे प्रभाव पड़ रहा है। अगर आपके पास अच्छा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर नहीं है, जहाँ पे स्कूल में अच्छा वॉशरूम नहीं है, तो वो एक्सेस नहीं कर पा रही है, तो इसका मतलब है जब वो मेंस्ट्रुएट कर रही है, पीरियड्स पे है, तो वो स्कूल नहीं जा रही है। तो कॉन्स्टेंटली ओवर टाइम अगर हर महीने 3 से 5 दिन आप मिस कर रहे हो स्कूल के, तो आप कितना सारा चीज मिस कर रहे हो। आप ऑटोमेटिकली अपने जो जिनके साथ आप compete कर रहे हो वर्ल्ड में, उनसे पीछे छूट जा रहे हो। Hi, sorry, I got stuck. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
So power fluctuation happened. So I was just saying, तो इसी लेवल पे पीछे छुड़ा रहे हैं, है ना। और अगर इसको थोड़ा सा भी अपन ऊपर लेके जाते हैं, तो anyway, in a world that's patriarchal and a society that's so cultural and religious, that has so much control over women's movements, है ना, औरत क्या कर सकती है क्या नहीं कर सकती, तो their ability to negotiate a career for themselves and study is anyway a challenge, right? It's anyway a struggle, वो already मुश्किल है, and then add the layer of SRHR to it and the issues that come with it, it becomes even further difficult. For example, somebody gets married, let's say early शादी हो गया है उनका, which means that कि शायद ना body equipped है to deal with a pregnancy, ना awareness है कि अच्छा ओके pregnancy ऐसे plan करते हैं, ना agency है to be able to say no, right? Because of the control that's there in the family system. So you are ending up not only with a marriage that's hindering your ability to have a career, but you're also possibly landing up in a could land up in an unplanned pregnancy, which not only derails your career further, but also can take a toll on your physical health, right? तो अगर आप उस समय प्रेग्नेंट, आपकी बॉडी रेडी नहीं है, स्पेशली जब अच्छा प्रीनेटल केयर नहीं है, व्हेन इन द एब्सेंस ऑफ दैट, तो कैसे ही पॉसिबल है टू बी एबल टू इमेजिन एंड फाइट फॉर अ करियर, राइट? दैट डिरेल्स योर प्लान टू एक्टिवली सीक आउट करियर। अगर हम मैरिड औरतों की नहीं भी बात करते, अगर हम यंग लोगों की इन जनरल बात करते हैं, क्योंकि इतना टैबू है, अगर सेक्सुअल एक्टिविटी में एंगेज किया और अवेयरनेस नहीं है, एंड यू बाय चांस एंड अप विद एन एसटीआई और एसटीडी, विच इज सेक्सुअली ट्रांसमिटेड डिजीज और इन्फेक्शंस, तो उसके लिए सर्विस एक्सेस करना भी बहुत मुश्किल है, राइट? क्यों इतना टैबू है, तो हम नहीं जा रहे हैं डॉक्टर के पास अपना इलाज करवाने के लिए, एंड दैट्स फर्दर क्रिएटिंग सच अ प्रॉब्लम दैट कैन हैव सच एन इम्पैक्ट ऑन योर फिजिकल हेल्थ, राइट? तो उसमें भी अब मेरा फिजिकल हेल्थ ठीक नहीं है, मुझे दिक्कत है, मैं डॉक्टर के जा नहीं रही हूँ, तो मैं कैसे ही एबिलिटी होगी मेरी टू कंटिन्यू परस्यूइंग माई करियर, माई एजुकेशन? आई एम गोइंग टू फॉलो आउट, राइट? इट्स इम्पॉसिबल टू नॉट फॉलो आउट, इट्स इम्पॉसिबल टू keep up with whatever is happening and still maintain, like, do your best when you're out there in your career. So I think has a massive impact on financial independence and career trajectories that people have.
Truly, ma'am. I think now that I see it, I think it is very much connected. I think there's also another aspect to it, like physical health is also very much connected to emotional well-being or mental health. A lot of people struggle with
Yeah,
that. And I think we
yeah,
don't have enough conversations around that. So can you shed
yeah,
some light on that?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think so much, like I just talked about, मतलब अगर आपके अगर सेक्सुअल हेल्थ आपका अच्छा नहीं है एंड आप इतना टैबू से डील कर रहे हो, तो आप ठीक से एक्सेस नहीं कर रहे, तो हाउ इज इट पॉसिबल कि आपका मेंटल हेल्थ अच्छा होगा? you know of course it's going to impact how you're feeling, it's going to impact how you're seeing yourself, right? Like the example that I just gave कि एक लड़की है, अगर वो स्कूल कॉन्स्टेंटली नहीं जा पा रही है, बीच बीच में उसको छुट्टी लेना पड़ रहा है, वो पीछे रह रही है, तो उसका कॉन्फिडेंस इम्पैक्ट हो रहा है ना? It's impacting her esteem, her self-esteem. It's impacting how she's seeing herself, right? It's impacting where she is getting in life and what she's imagining she could possibly get. So I think sexual health is very, very interconnected to physical, emotional, and mental health, right? So many issues that can possibly come up because of isolation. किसी भी चीज पे अगर बहुत टैबू है, बहुत स्टिग्मा है, तो उसके साथ कोई सपोर्ट नहीं है. And to go through anything is difficult. Alone is very hard, right? So अगर sexual and reproductive health का मुझे ठीक से awareness नहीं है, मेरे पास ठीक से access नहीं है, for example, तो if I've ended up in an unwanted pregnancy, for example, right? So because there's so much stigma and taboo, I don't know who to reach out to, and I'm struggling with that alone, right? And that constantly impacts my mental health. It adds to my stress, it adds to depression. So many young people, it leads to anxiety. And when we think about sexual and reproductive health का बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा ये भी है कि हमारे रिश्ते कैसे हैं हमारी बॉडी से. And so many young women and men grow up with the most difficult relationships with their bodies. आप ऑनलाइन ये परफेक्ट बॉडीज देखते हैं जो बहुत ही डॉक्टर्ड है, पर वो आपको लगती नहीं है डॉक्टर्ड है, एंड यू स्टार्ट प्रोजेक्टिंग कि अरे मुझे तो ऐसा होना है, एंड नथिंग इज गुड इनफ. यू आर नॉट गुड इनफ फॉर योर ओन सेल्फ, एंड दैट इम्पैक्ट्स हाउ यू फील अबाउट योर सेल्फ, दैट इम्पैक्ट्स योर मेंटल हेल्थ, इट इम्पैक्ट्स. इतने यंग लोगों से हम बात करते हैं, एंड क्योंकि जो काम है प्रभा का, उसमें बहुत सारा मेंटरिंग होता है, विच इज वन ऑन वन कॉन्वर्सेशन विद यंग पीपल और सेफ स्पेस कॉन्वर्सेशन विद यंग पीपल, जहाँ पे ग्रुप में बैठ के हम चर्चा कर रहे हैं, बात कर रहे हैं, और वहां पे निकल के आता है ये कि कितने लोग हैं जिनको डिस्कम्फर्ट है अपनी बॉडी के साथ. तो वो रिलेशनशिप भी एक SRHR का ही पार्ट है. व्हाट इज माय रिलेशनशिप विद माय बॉडी, बिकॉज दैट इज डिटरमाइनिंग कि मेरा सेल्फ वर्थ क्या है. व्हाट एम आई एक्सेप्टिंग. क्वाइट ऑनेस्टली, low self-esteem and low self-worth also really pushes people to be in relationships, whether intimate or not intimate, that are not benefiting them. जब मेरा सेल्फ वर्थ, मेरे को नहीं लग रहा है कि मेरा सेल्फ वर्थ है या मेरा सेल्फ एस्टीम हाई है, तो आई एम मेकिंग चॉइसेस टू स्टे इन रिलेशनशिप्स दैट आर not helpful, that are problematic, that are forcing me to be in situations and be in spaces that are uncomfortable. But because I don't look at myself, like I don't feel confidence in myself, I'm choosing those, and it's a very delusional choice. It's like almost like a forced choice, kind of, not really a choice. And that happens to young people. And they make those choices and they stay those relationships, and that depletes their mental and emotional well-being very, very massively.
So, ma'am, you talked about how sometimes we feel insecure about our body and fall into some bad relationship, if I say. So, what factors make it easier for young people to make informed and healthy choices about their bodies and relationships?
I think a lot starts from actually knowing that you have choices. What happens with a lot of young people is that एक ही चीज पता है, तो एक ही चीज पता होती, फिर वो चॉइस नहीं होती, आपको वही चुनना है ना. चॉइस तो तब होगी जब आपको पता है कि अच्छा ये 4 ऑप्शंस है, इसमें से कुछ चुना जा सकता है. हमें पता ही एक है, तो क्या हम चॉइस कर लेंगे, है ना. वी आर गोइंग टू चूज दैट ओनली बिकॉज देयर इज नो ऑप्शन. सो आई थिंक being equipped with the right kind of information that actually tells you the different options and perspectives available really allow you to make a healthy choice, है ना. पहले तो पता होना पड़ेगा to start off कि ये है important, है ना. I think the other one is that having access to spaces that feel safe for their questions and curiosity, है ना. Young people, especially in times today, with the kind of access they have, horizons have opened up, है ना. World is no longer मैं, मेरा स्कूल, मेरा परिवार, मेरा समुदाय. It's become very, very big, है ना. You can connect, being here, you can connect with somebody very far away in another part of the world quite easily. So when that's the reality, having safe spaces where you can have conversations is very important, which is why I think like literally what we're doing right now is very crucial. Or what KARM as an organization is doing with the different programs that they run, or Pravah as an organization is doing with the different programs that we run, is creating that safe space to have these conversations, right? Like we have one program which is called My Life Mere Faisle, and we have young people come in and get equipped to sort of learn how to negotiate, build their agency, navigate relationships, navigate conflicts, and really develop and grow as leaders within their own community, work on the issues of gender and SRHR. I think one of the most crucial cornerstones of this program has been this path-breaking safe space where you can come and actually have conversations about this. It's not something that's happening in isolation जहाँ पता ही नहीं है क्या करना है, किससे बात करनी है. I think वो conversations होते हैं तो 4 perspectives पता लगते हैं. Then you're like, oh, okay, this is a choice that I can make, right? It then brings to light what all is really possible, right? I think the other thing that I think allows somebody to make an informed choice is access, right? अगर different services क्या है मुझे पता लग गया, पर अगर मेरे पास उसका access ही limited है, then how I'm going to make that choice? For example, अभी we had gone to Thanagazi for some work, and there we interacted with some young girls from village, and Thanagazi is a small like town village kind of place in Alwar, quite remote. आगे कुछ लड़कियों से सर्च कर रहे थे, and we talked about कि क्या है वहां पे, what do you do during menstruation, what do you access, and they talked about कि हम तो कपड़ा इस्तेमाल करते हैं, and we asked कि क्यों, and it's not that they don't know about pads, they do, but the access to pad is so limited, right? It's available in that one clinic far away जहाँ पे जाना बहुत मुश्किल है, राइट? एंड अगर जा भी सकते हैं तो किसके पास एक्सेस है वहां तक पहुंचने का, राइट? क्योंकि कितनी यंग लड़कियों को तो स्कूटी चलाना अलाउड नहीं है, बाइक अवेलेबल नहीं है, सिखाई नहीं जाती, तो वहां तक पहुंच कैसे रहे हैं? तो आई थिंक इन्फॉर्म्ड चॉइसेस आल्सो आर इम्पैक्टेड बाय एक्सेस, right? So if you equip them with information but they don't have access and they don't have the methodologies and means to access those choices that you've talked about, then I think that also becomes very difficult. So it has to be information and access together in order to truly be able to make some of these informed choices.
Thank you, ma'am. I think one of the questions are more deeper into sexual health, and I think like the topics around it includes contraception. So I wanted to ask that what do you think are the fears, myths, or social pressures that stop young people from using contraception?
I think one of the most obvious social pressure is that sex को बहुत taboo के जैसे treat किया है. So when sex is treated as a taboo, then if I as a young person want to engage in sexual activity, then my thing is that कि sex taboo है, तो अभी chemist के पास जाके if I want to buy protection or contraception of any kind, then I'm going to be judged. But because I really want to engage, I would rather engage with in possibly an unsafe sex rather than subject myself to some judgment that I'm going to face at a chemist shop, right? So this social pressure of sex being a taboo. I mean, when I was in college, we would have conversations, truth dare game खेलते थे, तो we would have this conversation कि अच्छा ओ कौन गया है शॉप पे कभी condom खरीदने, for example, right? Because it would be so inaccessible, right? Because there's so much taboo around sexual activity that you would rather be unsafe than be subjected to some taboo or some comment or something by your roadside vendor. I think that's like the starting of the societal pressures. I think the pressures a lot of times also, or like myths for example, is also that contraception is become very, एक तो बातचीत होती नहीं है, और जो बातचीत होती है it's become very limited to condom as a contraceptive, right? The awareness that there are other contraceptive methods exist is so limited, right? Permanent, semi-permanent, women oriented, there's no awareness of it. पता ही नहीं है, बातचीत ही नहीं हो रही है, तो आप क्या एक्सेस करेंगे उसके बारे में, right? Another big myth that's there, that's used and also as a tool of manipulation in a lot of relationships, is that sex becomes less pleasurable in the presence of a contraceptive, right? So that also then hinders people, kyunki, oh, I don't want to engage with it, right? I think the other one being that conversation about contraception is also very limited to accessibility. कि अरे एक्सेस होना चाहिए, अरे पता होना चाहिए. I don't think there are enough conversations that are happening about the kind of impact that it's having. For example, a big culture that's come up, especially within young people, or has picked up, is that okay, if you've had unprotected sex, have this contraceptive, oral contraceptive जो होता है वो. But enough research hasn't happened and has only started happening in the recent times कि उससे प्रभाव क्या पड़ रहा है औरतों की हेल्थ पे, right? How is it impacting women's health? That's a question that's been very in the air, that's not been addressed, that's not been talked about, because women's reproductive health has been a very, very low priority for us as a society, right? So uske around me there's so much, like there's so much that we don't know, that makes it hard to be able to access it. Or if you're accessing it, so many times you're accessing it without awareness. आपको पता ही नहीं है कि कुछ साइड इफेक्ट्स है या किस तरीके से आपकी बॉडी को इम्पैक्ट कर सकता है, आपको वो आइडिया नहीं है. And I think the final one for me that stands out, that I've heard from a lot of young people in our conversations, is also that contraception has become equated to completely just preventing pregnancies. While, however, contraception is also about safe sex, right? It's about avoiding STIs, it's about taking care and ensuring that you're not, like, um, not catching any kind of sexually transmitted disease. And I think that part of the conversation is so limited. It's just become about contraception. Like, contraception has just become about, oh, you don't want an unwanted pregnancy, so you have to take it. But nobody's talking about the fact that it's also diseases that contraception is preventing you from. Okay.
So, mom, you talked about how limited access we have and how, in terms of information, in terms of reaching out to services and other things. So, what are the like challenges that people face while accessing these things? And how can we tackle those challenges? How can we reduce that and be able to be more informed and access these services?
I think like big challenges are around shame and taboo, right? Sexual and reproductive health and conversations around well-being about this has had a lot of taboo around it. There's a lot of shame that's associated with it. I think the other challenge is that there's massive lack of information, or there is ill information, right? There's misinformation. या तो पता ही नहीं है या कुछ गलत पता है. The fact that there aren't enough conversations that are happening. Parents are not talking about it, teachers are not talking about it. That's happening. I think another big challenge is also, especially in the SRHR space, I think, of course, we understand that this is a high stakes situation, and mistakes are very difficult here, can have very dire consequences. But I think that's been hyped up so much that it's become like, just a mistake here is just going to be the end of the world, you know and young people need that balance, where you are placing that this is a very challenging space and this is a mistake that will have very dire consequences, but it's also not being presented as the end of the world. It's being presented as something to take responsibility for and be responsible while making choices, but also that if something does happen or a mistake does happen, and I mean any kind of mistake, right? I mean a mistake even that okay, I access the wrong kind of menstrual hygiene product and now I have some sort of infection. It also means a simple mistake like that, or a bigger mistake, or any kind of mistake. Just knowing that okay, there will be support system mechanisms in place to help you navigate that mistake. It's not going to ruin your life completely. It may have consequences that you'll have to deal with, but it's not the end of the world, for that matter. So I think those are some challenges that come up. And I think in terms of how do you navigate it, I think so much of what we've talked about, right? Creating non-judgmental spaces at every level, ensuring that teachers, parents, even doctors, medical practitioners are equipped to receive and engage with young people with empathy, entertain their curiosity, help them get the right kind of information, is a way. I think also another way is safe spaces that a lot of different organizations create, to have these conversations, to address these issues, to challenge and build up counter narratives to what is really existing already. That's creating a lot of anxiety and taboo for young people to really normalize that this is part of life. This is a small part, and here's how we talk about it, here's how we address it, so that this doesn't feel like a larger than life problem. I think those are some things that come up for me when I think about how do you really navigate these challenges.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Uh, I think another question could be that, like around menstrual health and around women, I think there are a lot of diseases or some sort of conditions. What I think I want to say, that we don't really talk about. There are some,
Mm,
like what I've heard are like PCOS or PCOD and other
yeah,
conditions. I think there's not enough conversations or awareness around that. So,
yeah,
like, can you tell us something about that from your experiences?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think periods still today in our country are such a taboo, right? And when a country like ours, which is very religious, also very cultural, है ना? And menstruation for the longest time has also been very tied to a lot of religious practices, to a lot of cultural practices, for the good or the bad, right? Religion and culture and the norms that we have as a society has dictated, you know, uh, how okay, what is okay and what's not okay for you to do as a menstruating woman, or what is menstruation. There's so much myth and conversations and stories around menstruation that that has also become one of the topics that you hush about. How many, like, there are so many words that you call menstruation or periods with, then those two, you'll come, there's so many slangs, so to say, to sort of simple down or sort of be like, okay, we don't want to say what this is, it almost is a word that must not be spoken. And I think that is such a sorry thing to do for young women. you know we are telling them this is this part of your body that's happening to you literally monthly. We have almost demonized it or mystified it. you know it's become this thing that you have a very difficult relationship with, or are you confused about, and is not something that's being addressed. It's something that's continuously shunned, right? So I think being able to nurture women and men equally, right? So many today as well, when we talk about, conversations around menstrual health, it's completely about talking to women, and I disagree with that, right? It's important to also talk to men about menstruation, because then they come up with stories and own, and then those percolate, right? Those spread. So how do you break that? You break that by having those conversations with men and women, that मतलब डिजीज पे तो तब बात होगा पीरियड्स या मेंस्ट्रुएशन से रिलेटेड, जब पहले मेंस्ट्रुएशन पे बात होगा, जब उसी के अराउंड इतना कंफ्यूजन कंसर्न है. सो टू बीइंग एबल टू टॉक अबाउट ओ some condition like PCOS or PCOD, of course it will be a taboo, no? And very quickly, all of these conditions then also impact so many women's ability to reproduce, right? Make it easy, make it harder, which is so tied into women's self-worth in this country, that's, you know, conditioned like it is, that makes the whole process so hard. So I think some of those conversations, a really positive approach and normalizing and looking at periods as something that's part of life and not something that's this mystical thing, I think would help normalize some of these conversations. And then a lot of women will not have to suffer in silence. They will not have to bear with whatever pain they have during this time. Their pain will also be paid attention to and not trivialized, for that matter. So I think some of that can really help, look at also conditions and diseases associated with menstruation with a very normal and easy approach instead of this very terrifying thing.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So we have a question from our live chat from YouTube.
Yeah.
So they want to ask that there are different methods to use in at the time of periods, like menstrual
Hmm.
cups and then tampons. And there
Hmm.
are very less conversation about around this.
Hmm. Hmm.
So why does girls fear using these type of methods?
Hmm. I think क्योंकि नया है ना? Like if you go back, like for a long time, people were just using cloth. People then shifted to possibly cotton, and then pads came along, then tampons came along, now menstrual cups have come along. I think these are new, है ना? Anything that's new that has probably not been used by your mummy or your dadi or your nani is intimidating. You're like, oh my God, I don't know if I should use this. What do I do? But I'm not a doctor, so I don't think it's safe for me to comment कि सही है कि नहीं है. But in the advice that I have received, for example, from gynecologists, I have not heard a gynecologist say कि, oh, you can't use a tampon. I have personally used it and it's safe. I have not heard from somebody that, a doctor saying that, oh no, don't use a menstrual cup. I know friends who use it and it's all well. I think it's important in these cases to trust and approach a doctor to help you understand that, okay, what is the methodology that I should be using? I think as the world advances, different technologies and different inventions come about. And I think as long as we have doctors consulting on that and giving their stamp of approval when it's things related to health, I think we're good. So I think if anybody has that question, would be best to go to a doctor and ask that. Also, generically ask people around you. If you don't have an access to a doctor, which is very possible, because being able to access a gynecologist also really is very hard in our society today. So maybe ask friends who are using a tampon or a menstrual cup. Uh, because I know, for example, for me, a friend only told me how to use a tampon. That was, it wasn't something that I learned from my mother probably. Uh, yeah, you do that, and I think that can be very helpful.
Sima, we have another question. What role do boys and men play in either reinforcing stigma or
Hmm.
helping normalize menstruation in everyday space?
Mhm. I think I think boys are part of the, you know, entire narrative and story that's created around anything, right? It's not like ये सिर्फ लड़कियां बात कर रही हैं, औरतें बात कर रही हैं कि अच्छा menstruation के बारे में ये कहानी है, वो कहानी है. I think it's both are equally playing that role in creating that story and also propagating that story, quite honestly. So it's both working together. And for boys, I think it also is coming from complete lack of awareness. I remember, for example, मेरे समय में या जब मैं स्कूल में थी या कॉलेज में थी, तो sometimes this conversation used to happen, है ना? तो वे लड़कों को अलग से लगाते थे बातचीत में कि अच्छा मेंस्ट्रुएशन पे तुम्हें बात करनी है, तो तुमने वहीं पे सेग्रीगेट कर दिया. और मैं समझती हूँ द नीड फॉर दैट सेग्रीगेशन, स्पेशली कम्युनिटीज में, स्पेशली छोटी उम्र में. बट आई थिंक देन if you're segregating, then also have a conversation with the boys, है ना? Don't let this be this mystical thing जहाँ पे पता नहीं क्या क्या है periods, क्या है menstruation, right? Because then you're adding to that stigma, you're adding to that story that then they have their own theories about, है ना? कुछ होता है और उसके बारे में आपको थोड़ा सा पता है, पूरा नहीं पता है, तो human brain will automatically come up with the story, right? And I also think in a patriarchal society, both men and women also will use these stories to further propagate patriarchy, you know. So अगर मदद हो रही है पेट्रियार्की से, एंड क्वाइट फ्रैंकली ज्यादा मदद आदमियों को ही हो रही है, नुकसान भी उनको हो रहा है जो उनको पता नहीं है, पर पेट्रियार्की से मदद अगर आदमी को हो रही है, तो एज द मैन, एज द जेंडर इन पावर, दे वांट टू बी इन पावर, राइट? एंड यू वांट टू कंटिन्यू बीइंग इन पावर, एंड उसके लिए आप कहानी गढ़ोगे, आप कहानी बनाओगे कि अरे क्या कहानी कैसे बनाओगे ना कि अच्छा अरे वुमन इज मेंस्ट्रुएटिंग, सो फॉर सम days a month, so she's going to be inefficient, or she's not going to be she's going to work well, so she like probably shouldn't take up this job. बिकॉज तुम आदमी को हायर करोगे तो वो तो 30 दिन काम करेगा, औरत शायद 28 दिन करेगी, क्योंकि 2 दिन महीने के तो उसको समय चाहिए होगा, right? Because then that allows the push, like allows me pushes the woman to the margin, you know. of being able to access that job opportunity, for example. So I think also that, I think men and boys are playing an equal role in propagating that stereotype, in continuing that story, also because it's benefiting them in some ways or the other, there, right? For so many people, it's a reason to control. You know, patriarchy, for example, for the longest time, it's been about men controlling women and different methodologies and ways of being able to control women. So this also then becomes a way to do that, right? And I think this is not to say कि oh my god सारी problem आदमियों की है या क्या है. I think it's to recognize that this is a problem and you're part of the problem, and then what do you do with it, right? It's about recognizing that, it's about shifting that small norm in your own community, in your own life. It's about asking that question that okay, अगर मेरे अराउंड ये मिथ है या ये प्रथा बनी हुई है, जो मेंस्ट्रुएशन के अराउंड बहुत सारी प्रथाएं हैं हमारे समाज में, उसको चैलेंज कर पाना, उसको बोल पाना कि अच्छा ओके नहीं, it's not okay. So in your household, the next time you are hearing uh, something being enforced on a sister, wife, daughter, mother, anybody, any woman for that matter, then challenge that, question it, ask that why is it needed. And I think if more and more people, boys and girls, men and women, start critically thinking and challenging and questioning some of these things that exist, I think we'd be able to navigate some of these challenges and problems that we have as society quite easily.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for that. We have another question from the chat. How does peer influence, friends or classmates, shape the way adolescents talk about or hide menstruation?
Hmm. Oh, so heavily, I think. I think when you're in school, especially as an adolescent, I think your world is that, right? Like, I think most of the people, most young people, or adolescents actually, during that age of, let's say, 13, 15, really their world revolves around their friends and the life that they have in school, right? So many of them go through the streak of rebellion where you possibly hate your parents or don't like your parents. I know I went through it, where my whole world was my friends. That's what happened in school. So when you have that such a strong association with that particular group, it really defines who you are. It gives you a sense of belonging, राइट? हम एज ह्यूमन बींग्स, मुझे लगता है बहुत बड़ा जरूरत हमारा है बिलोंग करने का. तो मुझे उस ग्रुप में बिलोंग हो रहा है, तो वो ग्रुप जो कह रहा है वो आपको नहीं हूँ, मैं acceptable नहीं हूँ, that is the sole truth for me and that is what I'm going to do, right? So I think the influence that peers, friends at that point in time hold, to influence how you are seeing menstruation, how you're talking about periods, how normal it is, how much of a taboo it is, it has everything to do with that. So in a friend group, for example, and you'll see everything coexisting, you'll see a friend group that's probably talking about it very casually, but on the other end you'll also see a friend group which is just like shush hush hush hai sab kuch, है ना? You'll see friend groups and you'll see so many young mothers now bringing up boys where they're talking about them to menstruation, right? And that will influence how they are showing up for their friends and what kind of conversations they are having in those circles. So I think there's massive influence that's there, which is why I also think that that everybody, as young people, as adolescents, when you have this insight, when you have this awareness, it's also important to then go back into that group and talk about it, but I think also, despite saying that, I think so much of, and I don't mean it just with menstruation, I think so much of mental health conversation with young people or adolescents is also that uh, sometimes we end up forgetting that while access and conversation is very important, safety is important as well, right? Because when I talk about the fact that this is so religiously and culturally ingrained, it also becomes that the conversation is being done in a very safe, approachable manner, right? Where it doesn't become threatening for the young person or the adolescents, right? Where that safety is intact, and their access and the conversation and the right to access is not really superseding that safety that they need to be able to navigate it. Yeah, I think that's what comes to my mind.
So, like,
As we are moving towards like end of the sessions, I want to ask something about what we can do as
Hmm.
individuals. So like what
Indeed.
small like everyday shift can individual make to
Yeah.
normalize menstruation in their immediate circle, or maybe talk about what other type of services and information people can access.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the first and foremost, according to me, would be uh, having open conversations around it. Did I get stuck? Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Ah,
Yes, ma'am. You can
okay.
repeat that. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I was just saying, I think the first and foremost is being open to conversations, right? Which is, and also having open conversations. So the next time your friend wants to talk to you about something related to SRHR, be open to that conversation instead of trivializing it or joking about it. I think that would be one, right? Actively approach people to be able to have those conversations. I think that's what we can do as young people, right? That's really how we create a safe space for each other. I think that's one. I think also really practicing to be non-judgmental, right? That when people say things, because these are things that are personal and there's a lot of consciousness that comes in and comes up for anybody and everyone. So trying to be non-judgmental, that okay, this is a safe space and we can talk. I think the other very small thing that you can do, what I was saying, is think about it critically. So much of taboo around SRHR has just been propagated and continued. वो सदियों से चला आ रहा है, वो चलते ही जा रहा है. I think being able to think about it critically, and what that would mean is being able to question it. So the next time that you're told about a practice or about something to do or not do, I think being able to ask that, okay, why? And I think a lot of times as a society, the question of why and all of this feels like कि अरे तुम कैसे इतना क्वेश्चन कर सकते हो, तुम तो छोटे हो, ऐसे सवाल कैसे पूछ लिया, and all of that. And I think for parents, it's to sit with that, to not let that thought come to the forefront and be like, it's okay. It's important for young people to be able to challenge it, question it, because I think nothing in this world has shifted without people challenging it, without people questioning it, no matter how close and how much in the fabric of society something was. It is only come in when those questions have been asked, right? And I think the other one, which I think can be fantastic, is for young people to increasingly access spaces and initiatives that allow you to have this safe space to be able to talk about this and converse, right? Which, for example, one of the things that currently that Pravah is also hosting or organizing is a initiative called Chota Mu Khari Baat. Chota Mu Khari Baat quite literally is a play on the proverb Chota Mu Badi Baat. So जो मैं अभी बोल रही थी कि पेरेंट्स बोल देते हैं या बड़े लोग बोलते हैं, अरे तुम छोटे हो, बहुत बड़ी बड़ी बातें मत करो. So we are playing that and we say that it's not that छोटा मुंह खरी बात, बड़ी बात, it's छोटा मुंह खरी बात. तो हम छोटे होंगे, पर जो बात हम बोल रहे हैं वो खरी है, वो बहुत सटीक है, वो important है. So we run this initiative and we run doing different activities for it, online, offline. So becoming part of some things like this, becoming part of conversations that are happening in this regard in different spaces, and so many other organizations are also doing it. So actively seeking that out, because there you are having these conversations that are staying, that are thinking, that are like, doing something to your brain, that are sparking something, that you're able to think critically about it, that you're able to contribute to it. Then you can also be one of those people who become agents of, spreading that and taking that far. Right. So I think that, and like if anybody who's listening would like to know more about Chota Aung Khari Baat, you can go to Pravah Instagram or LinkedIn, and you'll see there's a lot that will be there. Pravah ka Instagram is Pravah India. So you can go there and you can see activities that are happening. We're doing them virtually as well as offline in different states: Delhi, Rajasthan, MP, UP, and Telangana. So you can become part of that, and I'm sure so many other spaces also exist that you could possibly access. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much. I would like to truly thank you. I truly believe in what you said. about unlearning and taking a step back to understand other people's perspective, and how that is what will bring the shift in the thinking, which comes from a place of unawareness often rather than true prejudice.
Yeah.
I think it's a mindset or a practice that all of us should have when dealing with difficult conversations. Today, your ideas around education, sexual and reproductive health has empowered the girls here today and created awareness for many of us. We are truly glad to have witnessed your wisdom and participated in these conversations along with many girls who found some answers today. I believe all of us will walk away from this session with a truly meaningful takeaway that allows us to empower those around us and, most importantly, ourselves. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us today, and everyone else who was here and participated in these conversations.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved hearing all your questions and having this conversation. So thank you so much for having me. It was
Thank
lovely.
you, ma'am. Thank you so much again from the KARM team. Thank you so much for taking this up at the last minute and talking about the topic which is tabooed in itself. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
And yes,
Thank
these are our Instagram QR codes. If you would like to scan and follow us, you can be just updated with our all the things. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.